Hello everyone, welcome. In this video I'll be sharing my thoughts on this book, Blindness by José Saramago, which I was reading the other week. Now for context, I'm doing this challenge this week wherein I read one book every week, at least one book every week, and it's going really well. In this video I'm talking about this one, Blindness by José Saramago. So I've been posting most of my reflections on Instagram, which you may follow here, but I thought to make longer form videos on YouTube just because I've been having trouble condensing all my thoughts in just 90 seconds. So I'll be talking about this book. Now, a few disclaimers. One, this being a literature book, I feel I have to say, this is not a traditional literary critique that I'm making. This is just me sharing my thoughts and reflections on the book. I don't even want to refer to it as a review because some people have a sense of what a standard book review should be. I wouldn't want people coming from me saying, that wasn't quite a metaphor. No. Secondly, I'm one of those weird people for whom you couldn't possibly spoil a book or a movie. So I'm comfortable someone telling me the content of a book before I read it. Now the problem with that though is I have trouble establishing how much is too much to say about a book to others that possibly haven't read it yet. So I don't know, I guess I should apologize in case I give away too much. So what happens in this book? There's an epidemic in a city that's not named, and it's an epidemic of white blindness. This guy is driving his car and suddenly he loses his sight, and people are frustrated behind him. They're honking and they're trying to say to him, move. And some people come to check on him and he's blind. And he gets the assistance of a few people to get back home. And then slowly, more and more people that have got in contact with him start getting blind. And in no time, lots of people are blind. And the government sets up this place, this quarantine, where the people go. And I'm trying not to give much detail away at this point. But all I can say is the quarantine happens and people are sent to this place where the quarantine is taking place. And stuff happens in this place. The novel is basically following a few characters in that quarantine and the experiences they have in there. And at some point, so much of the book is focused on that quarantine really, and the characters in that quarantine, the hardships they endure, what their experiences say about the human condition, how they navigate challenges, and lots of other interesting insights that happen within the quarantine. And ultimately, some situation arises that causes these people to leave the quarantine. That's after a really long time. And once they leave, everyone else is blind. And again, by some miracle, they regain their sight. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what this book is to do with. And believe me, that's not giving away much because there's so much detail in there. So I think how I'll go about this is, I'll talk about a few themes I feel came up in this book while reading it, as well as a few characters that stood out to me and what reflections came up in my mind, reading and listening, because I actually did listen to much of this book as well. The first is this, reading this book after coming from about 3 years of a pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic that only recently ended, I feel it's crazy. I described it as a really prescient book because this book was written in 1995, and José Saramago talks about lots of things that would accompany a pandemic that did actually happen during the pandemic. The fear that accompanies this a pandemic, how that people are frustrated and everyone is scared. There's absolute fear. When these people first arrive in this quarantine, they have all these questions. Where are we, first of all? How long are you going to be here? And, very similar in that regard. And then one thinks of all the isolation, the mental health challenges, the need for intervention, the question of the fragility of civilization, things closing down, difficulty in accessing things. But beyond that, and this is a separate theme on its own, what situations like this engender in human beings and what that reveals about their nature. So how people respond to these situations. The need for some people to flout the rules, to oppress others, to take advantage. All that is seen in this book. So that's the first thing. Another huge one that came to mind was the dehumanization that we see in this book. Now, I think Saramago does this. He does something really excellent because this book, as I said, is written in 95 and we are just about to get into the 21st century. And this book felt very much like many of the biggest challenges of the 20th century collapsed into this book. At some point, one thinks you're reading of people in a concentration camp after the government realizes more and more people are getting blind. And they have to decide where to quarantine them. And there's a few options. I think there was a warehouse, and there was a new industrial building that had just been completed. There was a mental asylum and one or two other options. And it's interesting, they keep eliminating, for various reasons, many politically or economically expedient, until only the mental asylum is left. So the people that are taken into quarantine are kept in a mental asylum. And the conditions there are deplorable. Deplorable, it's gruesome. Reading this book was very, very difficult. It's quite grotesque, the descriptions. Because think of this, so many blind people, only one person can see, which I think, by the way, was a brilliant technique. They have difficulty identifying where to go. And the soldiers that are keeping watch of them are afraid of getting in contact with them because the blindness is contagious. So when they bring the food, they sort of push it to them, and the people fumble in trying to get there. So we have stampedes, there's difficulty showering, people can't clean themselves, they can't wipe themselves. So at some point, people are living in conditions of excrement filled with lice and fleas, and there's the odor. And Saramago's descriptions are they're so vivid. They paint such a vivid picture. They're soldiers who are meant to be keeping watch of them, over them, but the soldiers are, one, afraid of catching the contagion themselves, but also don't really care because they feel superior to these people. In fact, there's a sergeant at some point that suggests that it might be better to kill everyone than have them alive because they are becoming a liability. So that's the kind of environment that one thinks of when they read this book, and it conjures up images of concentration camps and Soviet gulags and the breakdown of social systems and the loss of individual autonomy. Those are the kind of things that one thinks of, and it really paints a picture of the issues that were happening in that century. Of course, going a bit back as well, the Spanish flu as a pandemic that had happened, and the AIDS epidemic as well. So this book feels reflective of the time in which it was written. Another big theme for me in this book, and this is actually the biggest one and the one I reflected on the most while reading this book, is this idea of the absolute breakdown of social norms and social structures and laws that sustain society, really, and the collapse and the fragility of civilization and what that brings about, the base instincts that it engenders in people, and the competition and the desire to oppress, and really the evil of human nature when there aren't safeguards to keep eyes on everyone and to make sure everyone's accountable. At some point, it reminded me of Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, in which he talks about how that the aim of people that are oppressed shouldn't be to oppress the oppressors, but to try and resolve the issues that persist and seek their own autonomy, but by not trying to do to those that oppress them the same or worse than what was done to them. What's funny in this book is it's the oppressed that oppress the oppressed. There's episodes of sexual assault that occur and rape in this book, very disturbing, and Saramago describes everything in such detail, and that's set as a condition for food by blind people. It got me thinking about something, specifically relating to the African continent and many countries in Africa. This idea of the emergence of leaders in an oppressive situation, and how many times those leaders take advantage of the people that they are meant to be assisting. It got me thinking a lot about just the price that people pay in real life for poor leadership. Many times when I think of so many countries across the African continent, I think of how many missed opportunities and squandered dreams and lost aspirations are due to poor leadership. When you think of it, government is a human construct, and every human being deserves a right to self-determination, to achieving their full potential. But because some people are born in some parts of the world, they don't have the same chances at self-actualization as others, simply because of the governments in place. So to a large extent, because of the governments in place. And that thought it bothers me. I keep thinking, what a price to pay for happenstance, for having been born somewhere. Isn't that crazy? The last thing that I'll talk about is the philosophical inquiries that Saramago puts to the fore through this book. And it's written against the backdrop of the Second World War and the emergence of existentialist philosophy, whose main idea is questioning what the meaning of life is in the face of such deep suffering, especially as seen from the Second World War. And this book certainly touches on that to such great lengths. As I said, the mental asylum for me was a figure of a concentration camp. It didn't feel like a mental asylum or a quarantine. It was a concentration camp. Guards and people unable to see, the people being starved, the isolation, the mental health challenges, it all felt like a concentration camp. And this idea of finding meaning in suffering, I feel, comes out even in this book. Reminds me of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which I highly recommend as well. At some point, and I'll quote, there's a quote I wrote down here in which one of the people in the book says, "If we cannot live entirely like human beings, at least let us do everything in our power not to live entirely like animals." And that exemplifies the mindset of some in this camp. People really acclimate quickly to difficult situations. People treat that which is very unusual as if it were normal in this camp. At some point, people are having conversations, and Saramago just describes how that they're covered in feces and there's pungent smell, or there's a smell of blood, but they can't smell it because their nostrils are insensitized. Those are the kind of situations, and yet all they're focusing on is trying to work toward getting their next meal. So life actually continues in these situations, and that's, I think, something that shines through this novel. I'll just talk about one character that stands out to me in this book, and to try not to spoil this, I'll just say there's one person in this camp who can in fact see. And I think Saramago, keeping that one person is really brilliant, because it helps Saramago take we the readers into that camp and helps him as well make the story. It's amazing all they do, and the moral questions they face, the tough decisions they have to make in the beginning. This person has to pretend that they too are blind, and some people have suspicions, especially the soldiers, based on how they turn. It's very hard to act in such a situation, and the fact they seem like they see things, or how that they care for people in the camp. Even some of the blind people suspect, how does this person get to me so easily? How are they able to tell this or that? And this person has so many challenges and so many decisions to make. And for me, this character was so well built, so well crafted, so well described, and made this novel so powerful for me. Saramago's writing style is very interesting. He doesn't use quotation marks. He doesn't use semicolons or colons. He writes really long run-on sentences, and apparently lots of people have issue with this. I didn't have a big problem with it for some reason. I think it's because I've recently been reading lots of technical works and so many legal works as well, and so many clauses are written such that the thought is written from beginning to end. So I didn't have any issues with the really long sentences. So last week I was reading the Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa, which I'll be reviewing as well. And this week I'll be reading Dreams from My Father by Barack Obama. So the past 3 weeks' books are these. I hope you enjoyed them. I will enjoy the other 2 as well. And thank you so much. Please let me know what your feedback is. If you have recommendations for books that I should read, also remember to subscribe, like, and share. Cheers, and see you. Bye.